Without a doubt, the Atlanta Falcons got an absolute steal when they selected James Pearce Jr. with their first round pick. What's crazy is that this time last year, ESPN actually had Pearce listed as their #1 overall draft prospect, and this guy was going to break the NFL. Unfortunately for Pearce, he fell off a little bit in 2024, but due to some disciplinary issues, many teams decided to pass on James, and while he almost fell out of the first round, he was taken late in the first by the Falcons, and they got an absolute steal here. In today's video though, I want to talk about James Pearce. We're going to go through how he went from an unranked recruit his junior year to a 4-star and eventually a superstar player, almost worthy of the #1 overall pick. Plus, we're going to talk about how he fits with the Falcons. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you can support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about James Pearce Jr. But as always, in order to understand how Pearce got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He said he started playing football when he was just 6 years old, and he said it did not take him long to fall in love with the game, and he said he would have a successful future. When he turned 7, Pearce said, quote, "I never took my hands off the game, and I hugged onto it even tighter, and it's probably something I'll never let go of." When he was young, he ended up playing the skill positions on offense in addition to defense, and he said that football brought him peace and taught him many valuable lessons early on in life, and it was also a lot of fun for him. He said, quote, "It's God-given ability, and then comes with hard work after that." He ended up growing up a Carolina Panthers fan as he grew up in the city of Charlotte, and he said he loved those old Panthers teams that had guys like Cam Newton, Luke Kuechly, and Thomas Davis. He does miss the days when the Panthers were a little bit better, and I'm sure if he would have been drafted there, it would have been kind of cool, but he wasn't. As I said, he ended up getting to Julius L. Chambers High School in Charlotte, but was never on the NFL radar. He would not receive his first Power 5 offer until March 30th of 2021, as the Oklahoma Sooners would eventually give him an offer. Again, he was a part of the class of 2022, so this is definitely a little bit late. He would not even earn a spot in the 24/7 Sports database until August of 2021, and even then, he was only a 3-star. In 2021, a rival coach by the name of Stephen Wright from Cardinal Gibbons High School said that Pearce was an NFL talent after competing against him. As a junior across his first 15 games, he ended up having 14.5 sacks, plus 14 TFLs, 9 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, 2 safeties, and 2 interceptions. Oh yeah, and he also had 3 defensive touchdowns, including a 4th quarter strip sack and fumble recovery for a score. This guy was a beast on the field. At 6'5" and 220 pounds, he certainly had the size and athleticism to thrive as a receiver or as a tight end, but eventually he said those positions got boring. Pearce said, quote, "I've played offense before in my life, but the older I got, the more I didn't like waiting for the ball, and I like going and taking it from somebody else more." When the 2021 high school football season began, many believed that Jalen Walker from Salisbury High School was the best player in the state, but some said that James Pearce quickly gained steam on him. Also, if you haven't figured it out by now, Jalen Walker was the other first-round pick for the Falcons, so this is full circle. But, as I said, he ended up going to Chambers High School, where they ended up going to 4 straight state championship games and did win back-to-back titles in 2019 and 20, and as a senior, he had 14.5 sacks. He said he was going to hold off on his recruitment till after the state championship run was finished, and he wanted to focus purely on that. Eventually, Florida, Georgia, Mizzou, Ole Miss, and South Carolina were his final 6, and he had over 18 offers. Later on in 2021, he jumped from a 3-star recruit to a 4-star recruit and the state's #9 overall player. He said he was looking for a college program that felt like home and where he could go there and do his job and play and ball out. Wherever he would end up landing, many believed he was just scratching the surface on how good he'd be, and in terms of his crystal ball prediction, many thought he was going to be a South Carolina Gamecock, which meant he would stay close to home and play in the SEC. But he'd end up waiting to sign until February and chose to go to Tennessee over Florida, Georgia, and Ole Miss. Despite never taking an official visit to Tennessee, he was able to visit them a couple of times unofficially, and this would give him a glimpse of the staff, the culture, and what it would like to be there, and he determined that Knoxville was the best fit for him. The Tennessee staff also believed in him and thought he could develop into a first-round edge talent. They were going to pair him alongside Joshua Josephs in the 2022 class, and these were 2 great edge rushers for Josh Heupel to get on campus. What's interesting though is behind the scenes, Pearce had quietly signed with the Vols, but it wasn't public for a while. He ended up sending his signature in, but there was no hoopla and there was no social media, and it was sort of all business for James Pearce. His stock eventually blew up majorly, as in January of 2022, he rose up 400 spots to land at number 171 in the 24/7 Sports ranking, and his final ranking would dip a little bit, but not much. According to 24/7 Sports, James Pearce Jr. was a 4-star recruit, the number 18 edge rusher, and the 173rd best player in the class of 2022. So how would he do in Tennessee? Let's take a look. So when James arrived at Tennessee, the Volunteers would have their breakout season in 2022, in which they took over the college football world, but he was sort of buried in the depth chart and only appeared in garbage time. To be fair, he did have sacks against both Akron and Mizzou, but overall his freshman year was extremely limited, because honestly, he was just young and was not supposed to see much time on the field. But there was plenty of hype for him going into his sophomore year, as his position coach said, quote, "I've seen a lot of growth out of James and he has matured. He's got to continue in the right direction, and he has a lot of potential, but he's got to make sure he's investing enough to get what he wants out of this." He had huge shoes to fill, as they're going to replace Byron Young, who was selected in the 3rd round by the Los Angeles Rams in the 23 draft, and he went on to lead all rookies with 8 sacks that year. It would not take very long for Pearce to break out, though, as he ended up having 2 sacks in their season-opening win against Virginia, and almost single-handedly wrecked their entire offensive line. Pearce made a name for himself in that game, and that was the first of 3 multi-sack games for Pearce. He wreaked havoc against South Carolina and Iowa, and he had at least 1 sack, a TFL, or a quarterback pressure in all of Tennessee's 13 games that year. Pearce was truly a beast, and in total, he only had 27 tackles, but again, 9.5 of these were sacks, and he also had 2 forced fumbles, and also had a 52-yard pick six. Because of that, he ended up becoming one of the best defensive linemen in all of college football, and was listed as the number 1 overall prospect for the 2025 NFL Draft, according to ESPN. The Athletic also had him at number 1 overall, and they had him going to the Washington Commanders before they ended up having a good year. Offensive coordinator Tim Banks said, quote, "We think the sky is the limit for him. Obviously, he was just a sophomore, and I think he's just scratching the surface on how good he can be." Being a number 1 overall pick is pretty rare even at a school like Tennessee, as they've had just 2 in its school's history, both of which were quarterbacks. The last one, he was a guy by the name of Peyton Manning, who was the first guy off the board to the Colts back in 1998. Tennessee had not had a defensive player taken in the 1st round since 2017, and that was when the Eagles took Derek Barnett at number 14 overall, and he had the record for sacks in Tennessee football history. So how did Pearce do in 2024? Well, he was a little bit underwhelming at first, but by the end of the season, he got a lot better. He ended up having big games against Alabama, as he had 1.5 sacks in that game. He had 2 sacks against UTEP, and then had a sack against Mississippi State, Kentucky, Arkansas, and then half of one against both Florida and Oklahoma. It was a little bit disappointing, but still Pearce ended up finishing with 38 total tackles, 7.5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble, to go alongside 1 more pass deflection. He also helped Tennessee make it to the college football playoff, where they got curb stomped by Ohio State in the 1st round. He was a semi-finalist for the Bednarik Award and the Lombardi Award, and he was also a first-team All-SEC player by the coaches and was second-team by the AP. During his 3 seasons as an edge rusher for Tennessee, he let his actions always do the talking. He played in 39 games during his time in Knoxville, finishing with 19.5 sacks, which is 10th in school history, and he would also have 30 TFLs, 1 interception, and 71 total tackles. Josh Heupel said, quote, James is a smart player, and he's electric in his ability to rush the passer. He's grown on and off the field in 3 short years, and the best is still in front of him. James is now headed off to the NFL, and he was probably not going to go number 1 overall anymore. But at one point, ESPN's Field Yates said, quote, "The class is loaded with defensive line talent, but no prospect at the position has as much upside as Pearce. His first step quickness makes him borderline unblockable, and while he will make his money as a pass rusher in the NFL, his fluidity to drop into coverage on occasion also stands out." PFF said Pearce was the kind of athlete who has the production and disruption that could not let him get out of the 1st round, and then combining that, he ran a 4.47 40-yard dash time at the combine this past spring, and this was the fastest amongst defensive edge rushers. Apparently his vertical was terrible though. So why did this guy fall? Well, apparently there were character issues. He was a guy who needed to ace the interviews at the pro days, because apparently there were multiple teams looking at him, but he had significant character concerns and was in a precarious position on draft boards. I guess this all stemmed from an incident back on December 4th of 2023, as Knoxville police would arrest Pearce at a traffic stop for disobeying orders. They said he was driving 63 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone, and he also had an expired North Carolina temporary tag and an expired driver's license. The police would end up dropping the charges after he had proved he had renewed his driver's license and paid a speeding ticket. Honestly, all things considered here, that's not the worst thing in the world. I'm not quite sure why that would have him drop so far. But again, I don't know. Maybe there's other stuff going on behind the scenes. What's interesting is one director of player personnel on an AFC team said, quote, "He's in danger of getting dropped off our board. Granted, we are a strict team in terms of character, but we have a lot of concerns, and I think he's probably not a fit for us." But the Atlanta Falcons disagreed, as after they selected Jalen Walker with the 15th overall pick from Georgia, they traded back into the first round and selected James Pearce Jr. with pick number 26. A lot of people overreacted and said this was a bad pick and that they gave up way too much capital to get him. Pearce, though, was happy to finally get his name called, as he said, quote, "Some people might use negative to fuel their fire. I feel like that was a super positive thing that the Falcons did, and that fueled my fire. That put a lot of gasoline on there for sure, and it makes me want to go ahead and play for this organization a lot harder and a lot better." NFL Network's Ian Rappaport reported that the Falcons did a ton of homework on him and felt comfortable trading up for the edge rusher. He said during the draft that they talked to people close to him, including his mother, and that everything checked out. Yeah, James Pearce may have more upside than pretty much anybody in this year's draft class besides Abdul Carter, and they honestly got him at a discounted rate. This was a guy who was supposed to go number 1 overall a year ago, but they got him in the late first, and they can pair him alongside Jalen Walker, and they're going to hopefully develop these two guys, and they'll become stars in the future. But for now, I'm totally focused on Pearce, and I think this guy is going to be great for them. But what do you guys think? If you're a Tennessee or a Falcons fan, what do you think of James Pearce Jr.? Why do you think he fell in the draft, and how do you think he'll do in the league? Be sure to let me know down below. Let me know which rookie I could cover next. Check out my playlist with all my videos like this, and also all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about Mike Green. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.